Welcome to Lecture 2 for Ecology. This time we're going to be talking about life on land. This is still part of our introductory week. And this time we'll be talking about large-scale patterns of climate variation, temperature, understanding how we get seasons and different climates around the world, and a little bit about soil. One of the things that ecologists do is provide information to resource managers so that they can more effectively either manage or reestablish or enhance major ecosystems. In the study that begins this chapter, Jansen understood the natural history of the tropical dry forest in Costa Rica, and that understanding really aided in the restoration of this forest. Jansen knew that the dispersal of seeds for the Guanacaste tree was critical to the survival of the dry forest, and this previously was done by large herbivores that had gone extinct as a result of extensive hunting. And he recommended that horses be used in order to replace that major herbivore. These seeds need to go through the digestive tract of a major herbivore in order to germinate and repopulate the forest with its predominant tree, the Guanacaste tree. And so in this way you can see how an ecologist's understanding was able to help resource managers to involve, in this case, the horses in the reestablishment of that forest. In order for ecologists to understand ecosystems, they really need to understand the mechanisms behind the climate variation that we see on the planet. And this comes from the tilt of the Earth, and that produces the seasons, as is explained in the diagram in your book, and also the spherical shape of the Earth that causes air circulation north and south of the equator, and causes the patterns of rain and dry that we see across different parts of the Earth. And if we consider the diagrams that are provided in your book, this really explains how this works. Right along the equator, the sun heats the Earth the most because that's the closest to the sun because of the spherical pattern, and that causes the air to rise. Warm air can hold more water than cold air, so that as this warm air rises and it has lots of moisture in it, it'll start to cool down as it moves up into the atmosphere. And this cooling then causes condensation. As the water condenses, it's in that air, then it starts to fall out as heavy rainfall in the tropics. And then the air on one side of the equator, the north of the equator, it moves to the north, and the other side it moves to the south. And then it drops down, and now it's very dry air. So in this region, around 30 degrees latitude, we see the dry deserts of the Earth. And this pattern continues up to the poles. So this is the way our different climates are developed. If we then consider the pattern of winds, we have to remember that the Earth is rotating on its axis. And so these winds aren't driven just north and south, but also east to west, as you saw in that diagram. Now we can look at another perspective of climate in different parts of the world by considering a climate diagram. And here we see on the left-hand side of the graph, we have temperature in degrees centigrade. And on the right-hand side of the graph, we have precipitation in millimeters. And by looking at those two side by side, we can see for different parts of the world whether this climate is going to be conducive for plant growth and animals to survive. On the x-axis of the graph, we have the months of the year, and the red shading shows you which parts of the year that the mean minimum temperature is above freezing. So you can see there's lots of information packed into these graphs. When you have the mean annual precipitation line above the mean monthly temperature line, that means that there's enough water for plants to grow and the organisms to survive effectively. When that goes below, then you have kind of a desert environment. So as we go through the various localities around the world, the different biomes, we'll be using these graphs in order to explain what the climate is like in that region, and by carefully looking at the graphs, you can get an idea of what part of the year plants can survive effectively and the parts of the year when it's difficult for them, and see whether that biome can support a large diversity of organisms. In order for ecologists to understand a biome, they really need to understand the soil in that area. And the soil is a very complex mixture of organisms and organic material and minerals. It's said to be one of the most diverse ecosystems on the planet, rivaling the coral reefs and the tropical rainforests. If we look at the profile of soil, we can get an idea of what that structure is like. Now, you don't have to memorize the different soil levels here, but I'm just trying to give you a general understanding of how important the soil is. The different horizons starting at the top of a soil profile have a lot of organic matter in the O horizon, and then a mixture of minerals and clay, silt, and sand below that, and then it goes down to more of the parent material, which is basically rocks. So soil is being built up from the top and also from the bottom, with the minerals really getting involved in the soil from the bottom and the organic material from the top. So as you dig down through soil, you'll have the black, highly organic material near the top, where plants and animals have been dying and decomposing and adding to that. And then as you move further down, you get less and less organic material, and you get more of the minerals. You can see this on a beach when you walk from the shoreline back. The sand gets darker and darker as more organic material is introduced from the plants that are living there. Now we'll start looking at the different terrestrial biomes around the world, and the main thing to focus on here are the distinguishing plants and animals and the rainfall and temperature in that region. So for each of these, if you know those things about the biome, you should be fine when it comes to test time. We're looking at these in order to understand the distribution of plants and animals around the world. And we start out with the tropical rainforest, which is mainly around the equators and has little variation in temperature, a very high rainfall, and as we mentioned before, the soil gets leached from, or the nutrients get leached from the soil very, very quickly. And here we have a fungus called mycorrhiza, which attaches to the roots in order to help draw up the nutrients. And organisms in the tropical rainforest are very, very diverse. There's large trees, and when we look at the diagrams associated with the tropical rainforest, we see that the heavy rainfall provides a lot of that blue space in there in the diagram, indicating that plants and animals can survive very nicely in this environment. We also see the location around the world of these tropical rainforests. So we see things like kapok trees and a wide variety of birds and animals that live in the canopy of the rainforest that we also talked about before. And then we move to the tropical savanna. This is an area that has fewer trees, a little less rain. It's a little further north and south of the equator. And we can see when we look at the diagrams here that a portion of the year is really not conducive to plant growth. You see that those yellow patches showing up. But then there is a section of the year that does get a lot of rain. In the desert environment, we have fewer organisms. There's still quite a diversity of creatures in this environment. The big thing here is, of course, water retention strategies for the organisms that do live there, and also for the plants. So we have things like cactus that have special adaptations in order to retain water and not lose it through leaves like the trees in our area. And we have animals that hide under rocks and maybe only go out and hunt at night. And you can see here from the diagrams that this is an area that's very, very difficult for animals to live. The kangaroo rat, in fact, never takes a drink throughout its whole life. In the Mediterranean woodland and shrubland area, we have moderate rainfalls. It's a moderate climate, kind of cool. The soil is fertile, but they call it very fragile soils. And fire becomes a very important aspect of this. And you can see that part of the year the rainfall is not effective. And a similar type of thing in the temperate grasslands in our area, which were once dominated by the bison, which are coming back, by the way, and also large animals like cattle, domestic cattle. Here we have vegetation, the grasses that are actually maintained by reoccurring fires in this environment, and the soils are very, very rich and deep with a lot of organic material in them. When we look at the diagram of this area, we see that rainfall is quite good, and we don't have a lot of dry times. So it's a very good environment. Looking at the temperate forest, and this is the old growth forest, the original forests in our area, we see that there is a high amount of rainfall in these areas. The soil is very fertile, and the biomass is mainly contained in the trees, and a lot of people live in this area. So in terms of ecological impact, it has to do with pollution that the people are generating. When we look at the diagrams here, we see a lot of rainfall in most of the year, and a little problem during the summer. And then when we consider the boreal forest, the northern forests, here there's a fair degree of rain, but for a lot of the year that water is frozen, and so it's not available to plants. There are a good number of animals that live in this environment, particularly during the summertime. They migrate into this area and use it as breeding grounds. In the tundra, we don't find trees in this area because they can't establish themselves because of the frozen ground year-round. The upper portions thaw out and become very, very spongy. But this is an area that does support a large number of mammals with wolves in this area and certain types of elk and deer. There's quite a number of animals living in this area. When we look at the diagrams here, we see that there is a significant amount of precipitation, but a large portion of the year is below freezing. When we consider the mountains, we're really looking at a wide variety of climates, because as you go from the lower areas to the higher elevations, the climate changes dramatically, and so do the plants and the animals. You can go through many different types of ecosystems as you travel up the mountains and then back down into a valley. And this is an area which has provided good production for many human populations. When we look at the distribution of mountain environments, you can see the Rocky Mountains there, and then going down into South America and the Andes Mountains. So in review, we've seen large-scale climate. We've looked at temperature and atmospheric circulation and climate diagrams around the world, and a little bit about soil.